speaker now on the panel, Mr. Umadart Manraj, who is an agricultural economist, lead consultant of I Think Global Consulting Services Limited. Mr. Manraj is a PhD candidate at University of the West Indies. I'd like to invite him now to present.
Fruitful morning, everyone. Respectfully, Mr. Martin Franklin, and I acknowledge the chairman of the Tableland Pineapple Farmers Association, Mr. Ramash Ramsumir, who has not only been talking about agriculture or walking the talk, but certainly running the talk over the years. World Food Day is on Sunday with the theme, Climate is Changing, Food and Agriculture Must Too. So the question is, can we turn agriculture and fisheries into our new oil and gas? How are we feeling about agriculture being last on the agenda this morning? One day Trinidad and Tobago will put farmers and fishers first. The younger people would say they are the new wet men in Venezuela, Russia, China, Vietnam, and so on. But we know the Venezuelan experience. But do we, as a population, appreciate that Standard & Poor's downgraded Barbados just a few weeks ago to junk bonds or non-investment grade? How does that impact on public debt, their borrowing capacity, and so on? One reason cited was persistent current account deficits. We continue to run fiscal deficits in Trinidad and Tobago, and we remain net food importers. Finance Minister Carl Membert said that the revenue this country earned from petroleum in 2016 amounted to just $1.7 billion compared to 19.3 2 years ago in 2014. He said when other shortfalls are taken into account, this government had $20 billion less to run the economy than when the previous government was in office. He made this statement at a political meeting in Mount Dore recently. At market prices, agriculture contributed $761 million to GDP in 2015. Stakeholders involved in the sector would agree that agriculture and fisheries are critical to economic recovery. But firm policy position, as said before, are needed to directly foster production and to build that comparative and competitive advantage in value addition. But as well importantly, to regain the trust and goodwill among stakeholders of the sector. Given respect for the circumstances of rural and coastal communities, and targeting limited resources in an optimal manner must be seen as reciprocal in our struggle for food and nutrition security. That's probably the least we could start with as a country. In the current and anticipated economic circumstances facing Trinidad and Tobago, we cannot deny that the cost of living and economic hardship is on the rise. It is therefore a necessity for policymakers to do more towards preserving food and nutrition security at the household level. For example, Venezuela now has a Ministry of Urban Agriculture. Not entirely relevant in our circumstances, of course, but it emphasizes the need to educate on the perception of agriculture, on home initiatives, hydroponics, and self-sustainability. Protect the men and women who feed the nation with produce and products. Farmers, fishers, entrepreneurs act aggressively to stabilize sentiment and build consensus on the way forward. Remember snail mail, landline phones, donkeys on farms, and all these things. Trinidad and Tobago really cannot afford for food production, which is really like an old-time religion, to become a memory, in my opinion. We must be mindful that developmental issues continue to be a challenge for the local food production sector. The integrity and sustainability of the Gulf fishery, for example, continue to linger in the minds of consumers, and food production otherwise continues to be risky and appears to be a gamble for farmers. Our call on the sector, depending on the ebb and flow of the economy over the years to be a pillar of diversification, is to me simply a rhetoric. We have to act, and our actions will determine our priorities. The allocation to the Ministry of Agriculture for 2015-16 was approximately $1.2 billion. $156 went to the development program. $25 million of that was targeted to two specific projects, which is a fishing port in Caranage and Moruga. So that's already a smaller fiscal space to work with. And in this current year, that is down to just half, which is $80 million. The rest of the allocation of $766 million is for salaries and wages. With the already limited fiscal space, it clearly calls for all hands to be on deck, as Vasil said before. But those hands are especially by the people who are paid by the state to support the growth and development of the sector. But what do we have to invest in? According to UN Comtrade statistics, 2013 to 2015, Little Trinidad and Tobago would have imported over $1 billion in baby foods. Those baby foods really are peach-flavored apple, cinnamon, and all these nice things, not mango and chenet or whatever. So that from birth we have conditioned the taste and preferences of our children to eat in a certain direction. And when they reach the school age population for the school program, we say eat local. To me, that interpretation is telling children eating local is a form of punishment to some extent. 2.5 billion in fruits and vegetables of varying forms, 1.5 billion in rice and sugar. Two commodities which we were probably self-sufficient in years gone by and certainly had export potential. 155 million in the basic dal, red bean, chana and lentil peas, which we obviously consume on a daily basis. Our food imports approximate 5.5 billion and is expected to rise this year given the exchange rate pressure. Our capacity to maintain our affinity for these imported foods is evaporating. Our position and dependency on imports must be understood within the global value chain, of course, where China in September set out to invest $450 billion to modernize their agriculture sector by the year 2020. The focus of that investment is to build capacity in their food trade overseas, to protect their own national food security, and to strengthen the Chinese seed industry. China is our second largest trade partner, about 7.5% of total imports in the last year. That's about 482 million US. First up is the USA, of course, with 38.9% of total imports, or about 2.5 billion US. The FATCA legislation, bacchanal recently, of course, in my view, would have, well, the failure to deal with it, of course, would add distress to our food and agricultural input supply simply because we depend on them for so much. Just this month, Russia became a grain superpower with their wheat production exploding this year. And two main reasons. One is rising investment and falling ruble, which is their currency, helping drive output. And two, Russia is returning to wheat export, a lead that they once had under the Caesars, which was the former leadership. And this season harvest has helped to fuel an explosion in grain exports that has allowed Russia to displace long-time leaders like the US and the EU. So long known for their oil and gas, Russia is now moving to retake leadership in the world in wheat trade, which is really one of the most traded commodities around the world. In September, World Bank urged Vietnam to overhaul its agriculture sector as a major pillar of diversification and development. The message was lead less and facilitate more. That was their message to government. So people have started to think about the future. On the ground, farmers and fishermen agree, the table and pineapple farmers, felicity fishermen, agree that in the short run as net disposable income falls, policymakers and administrators need to ensure that our social safety nets are responsive and certainly that people do not fall below any minimum living standard, at least where household food and nutrition security is concerned. We thought that they need to incentivize and encourage greater use of local content in the food and beverage industry and curtail the importation of things that obviously directly compete with local. The minister made a statement in the parliament recently where we imported $3.3 billion in food between October 2015 to March 2016. $100 million was whiskey. Obviously, people went away with the whiskey price, but people on the ground know that that's obvious. About 5 years ago, we started to observe something called an Eat Local Day around the festive season, as is being done in St. Kitts. And yesterday, we heard a presentation where St. Kitts actually run surpluses. So considerable effort must be put towards instilling food sovereignty in public policy. In terms of subsidies, the international discourse has moved certainly from subsidies towards investment. So we have to change the rules of the game in Trinidad and Tobago, the laws, the regulations, the institutions as it relates to agriculture, to address direct problems or achieve goals such as economic growth, environmental protection, or poverty alleviation, which are the three main things you can extract, in my opinion. And it may also require seeing the end of certain programs and agencies that simply do not add value in the current economic circumstances. Fishing communities continue to struggle. We know what's happening between Caranage to the carcass with the Gulf fishery. The fisheries trade is damaged because of the fish kill and so on. I propose to government something akin to the European Maritime Fisheries Fund, which seeks to protect their fishing industry and coastal communities for them to adapt to changing conditions in the sector and become economically resilient and ecologically sustainable. We also urge government coming into the budget to look at enterprise selection strategy and build on territorial marketing and production strengths to transform agriculture. But what did we see in the budget? We see major reliance on the non-energy sector for revenue generation, but no disincentives to promote the behavior we would want to see regarding local food production, processing, and consumption. One very important role that I didn't hear Vasa mention is the role of the consumer. In the history of Trinidad and Tobago, we have never included or consulted really with the consumer in our agricultural planning. So to what end do we produce what we produce? companies processing 75% or more local inputs. The minister really alluded to these things in April when he had the run for food with Massey stores around the savannah, where he talked about private investment, $30 million for a vegetable facility and so on. But to benefit from the certification as to be tax-free, the ministry has to build capacity to do that certification. What's the experience with NAMDEVCO and farm certification? We talked about stabilizing public sentiment before, and the fact is people still question chemical residue on local vegetables. Something as simple as that, the quality of water we use to irrigate crops, and random testing of food in this country. The Food and Drug Lab, for example, is more defunct than anything. So if we want to boost agro-processing, certainly we need to match an increase in production, if not exceed it, to satisfy consumption, any export opportunity, and to deal with food losses. So what we have not looked, for example, into incentivizing seed and plant material within private sector, of course, outside our dependency on the ministry station. We talk about looking at the maritime sector for boat repairs, yachts, and so on, but again, the question of integrity and sustainability of the Gulf fishery, to me, needs to be addressed first. A passing mention of the complete removal of duties and taxes on agricultural inputs, such as the chemicals. But when we do that, in my opinion, we do nothing to incentivize organic production and good agricultural practice. So we keep some farmers on a treadmill of wanting to bring in crops sooner, more abundant, because of environmental issues as climate change, the economics of agriculture, social issues as predial larceny. And let me get to my conclusion, which is, right here on campus, the Minister of Agriculture made the statement that, I want to quote him directly, said that despite any future increases, it would be impossible for agriculture and fisheries to replace oil and gas with respect to contributing to the country's GDP. Instead, he said its contribution would be to the earning capacity of individuals in rural communities. He went on, cocoa is a vital commodity in rural Trinidad and Tobago. If we can rehabilitate estates, we can boost production, and if we can convert that into purchase and consumption. That is where the true effects is going to be found, not in agriculture's contribution to GDP, but agriculture and fisheries' contribution to rural development and the earning capacity of rural households. But really, how do we calculate GDP? I don't know if you're on a different level there with that one, but remind me, if we have no money, we have new energy, healthy eating and environment, and green accounts. Call member, the Minister of Finance at the Chamber of Industry and Commerce post-budget, when they were batting for tourism and the Sandals Resort, he said the economic footprint of that investment is $500 million a year. My view is simply 1.4 million people in this country, 3 meals a day, $25, is we consume over $100 million in served meals per day in this country. For the year, that's $36.5 billion, and that's a very naive estimate of the food industry. And what percentage of that is local, what percentage of that is foreign? The Honorable Prime Minister is now calling on to terminate people who in the public service who are not agitating their real role and so on. But we made that call 2 days after the election, September 9th, for a quick examination, the state enterprise and so on. I wouldn't read that. And finally, where are we in the diversification conversation? In my opinion, I submit to the conference here that is simply we right back at the start, given the utterances recently. And I'm not convinced that we have the policy commitment or the signals that the economy or country will consider or rely on agriculture as a cornerstone in this diversification trust. And therefore it lingers on the national development agenda. The effort going forward requires that policymakers wake up to the new reality of the day, engage out of the box thinking, and understand that it cannot be business as usual in Trinidad and Tobago, especially if we seek to protect the vulnerable among us, maintain social stability and cohesiveness. The Ministry of Agriculture is due to disclose its 2016-2020 action plan soon. Hopefully that sends the proper signals, bring cohesion or whatever. But that's coming after the budget, so people might simply say that's just a recalibration of existing projects and programs because it's not coming with a financing mechanism per se. But this is not to say that we have limited confidence in government or ministers and so on, but it's to demonstrate the fact that farmers and fishers cannot go at the mammoth task alone. Thanks for the opportunity and the audience.
Okay, good day. I was telling someone this is one of the most fruitful of the consultations that I've been to. I come at somebody, I think Fazir asked the gentleman, are you a professional, what this guy Kublal saying? I may be a professional attendee at conferences, but this is the best that I have attended in the last year or so that I've been attending these conferences.
A fruitful morning to everyone. Ramash Ramsamerd, Chairman of the Tableland Pineapple Farmers Association. I would like to thank the university for the invitation, and Mr. Umadat Maraj and others. And being here since yesterday, it is indeed a pleasure to be understanding beyond the farm what food business is. In a few days' time, we'll be celebrating World Food Day. Food is very important. It was important. It is today. And it will be the future. All right? Much time wasn't given, basically yesterday and today. These are forums that must be encouraged, but must be encouraged 10 times more with the stakeholders, starting with the farmers and fisher folk. All right? I have a question, but I am very concerned that today, as we sit here with all the data that is presented, and the university, we are in the economics department. Yes, in the last 10 years or so, this data was out there. There's a lot of research being done, but yet still we find ourselves where we can't feed ourselves. We produce the best fruits, vegetables, root crop, etc. in the world. We have all that data. University has our agriculture department here on cocoa, etc. For me, let's be frank, they have failed because of the fact that we have not been able to reach that important capacity in production that was explained by Mr. Vassal Stewart and all these speakers this morning. What you have seen, I commend all the speakers from yesterday, and this agricultural sector, you all have left the best for last. That's wonderful. And all the speakers there have highlighted where we are today and what the future really lies in. And with respect to the agri-diversification in the budget, 2016-2017, what signal do you send 766 million TT dollars? All right? 60, 70%, maybe 90% in salary and wages. How are we going to develop on all the data there showed our import, what we import in? We need Forex to import all those food. $5, $10 billion. So you all have the stats here. Wearing a farmer's hat, I speak. We, the farming community, farmers and fisher folk, weren't consulted by the university, by the government of this country, and all the other stakeholders. And who holds the key? We are the ones who produce. We have a lot of young people here. Most of the thing we consume today is 90% our foreign taste and lifestyle. I am not bashing it. I stand here. I am part of you. We farmers and fisher folk, we produced 54 years ago. We can produce now with your technology and your data that is available today, with all the offshore diversification, onshore diversification farming. So we weren't consulted. So the question to the panel there, right, is that what do we do here from today? Will we come back here to the 15 consultation with COTE and see this half of this area here full with all the farmers and fisher folk groups in Trinidad and Tobago, the sectors? Because for me, the Ministry of Agriculture have failed miserably with respect to delivery. You don't take 12 months to pick up data that you could do in 1 month and then plan. So the question, how serious are we about diversification and the contribution that agriculture can really play for the future of Trinidad and Tobago in the next 12 months? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments and questions. I'm going to put it to the panel. We're going to keep these answers as short as we can right now in the interest of time. So we can start with, let's start down on the end and we can move forward. Mr. Maraj?
Everyone can hear me? Yeah. Just quickly, 3 things. The first speaker spoke about the fragmentation in the sector. Within the agriculture sector, of course, there's something called the Agricultural Society of Trinidad and Tobago, which is like not really an oversight, but a functionary, a link between the government and the people on the ground. And that, if you know the history of the organization, would explain why there is no organization and coordination in the sector to a greater extent, because people follow what the lead is, what is happening at the lead. But it also speaks to me about the failure of people-centered development, because if everybody in a vast sector like this all over the place, to me, that is the failure of people-centered development, not the cotton gate and laptop and all this kind of nonsense. But we have advocated over the years that when you approach the sector for leadership and to get this thing going, we always call for an approach of consultation, collaboration, and coordination. And that really entails what Vassar spoke about, opening the floor to everybody in one place and not running around and meeting people individually and so on. Because a lot of personalities are involved in the sector. The second commentator spoke about how serious are we about agriculture. I wouldn't answer that because that would be ad nauseum, but certainly if you check C News Live on YouTube, you look for a news clip called "The Population Needs to be Educated on Agriculture." And for a few minutes there, you'll see where I've answered that particular question. And the last gentleman spoke about cashews and tree crops just as one of his examples. Tree crops is different from the short crops, the little tomato, the bygone, and whatever. And when you look at tree crops, yes, they have a lot of value. The breadfruit, for example, is a world phenomenon. But to me, three things hamper or have moved us away from that, which is environmental issues such as climate change and so on, the economics of agriculture. Farmers can't really wait, or rural people, in my opinion, cannot wait the 2-3 years for these crops to come in. But they also want cash soon, just like all of us wait every month in for our salary. They too would need money. Yes, there are supplementary crops and so on that you plant around these things, but that's one issue. And the other issue, of course, is praedial larceny, a social issue, which is you can't leave these things 2-3 years, stand up there and expect to go and pick something wholeheartedly. Of course, by that time, it might be left just for the leaves or so on. Thanks.